The Big Ten East and a potential trip to the conference title game on the line in Beaver Stadium this weekend. Number 2, Ohio State trying to continue its dominance across the sport with its biggest test of the season against 13th ranked Penn State. The Buckeyes 7-1 against James Franklin. Now let's bring in the guys who know these teams best, Dave Biddle and Tyler Donohue. Guys, the big game atmosphere at Happy Valley never disappoints. The whiteout game was a success. Now they're hosting the stripe out for the noon game. That crowd noise won't be the only thing bothering CJ Stroud and company. The Nits have a secondary that has the talent to actually hang with Ohio State's NFL caliber wide receivers. David, what do you like about this position matchup?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, Ohio State has faced some good secondaries this year. Notre Dame has a good secondary. Iowa last week has a good secondary. But this will be their toughest test, as you said, Grace. I mean, this Joey Porter Jr. and the boys can really play back there for this Penn State secondary. Ohio State still has a very electric passing attack with C.J. Stroud. He's got the #1 passing efficiency rating in the country. Ohio State's a little bit more balanced this year than they were last year. In fact, they're a lot more balanced. They were so reliant on the passing game last year. Buckeyes have the #4 total offense in the country, number 15 passing offense, number 21 rushing. So a lot more balance this year. But C.J. Stroud, when he needs to, can air it out. We saw what he did last week against Iowa, where the Ohio State was really struggling to move the ball on the ground, and then they, really came alive in the second half with 4 touchdowns. So even without Jackson Smith-Njigba, who was expected to be the #1 wide receiver in college football this year, and I do not expect him to play against Penn State, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, and Julian Fleming have really stepped up for the Buckeyes. But this will be their toughest test for sure.
There was a ton of preseason talk here in Happy Valley about what the secondary could accomplish, and thus far through 7 games, they've lived up to that hype. This is the biggest test, though. You're facing a team with 3 wide receivers, 6+ touchdowns, a lot of familiarity with Julian Fleming. He was the crown jewel here in the recruiting spectrum at Pennsylvania. Penn State wanted him badly. He's going back to Beaver Stadium as a main figure in this offense for the first time. So there's a lot of matchups out there. There's other wide receivers waiting in the wings, and oh, by the way, there's a Heisman Trophy candidate delivering the ball to them. Joey Porter Jr. is the headliner here. He is really projected to be the first ever first-round cornerback picked out of Penn State. He has certainly locked down that status through 7 weeks and a chance to do that. I'm curious to see what that matchup against the big-bodied Marvin Harrison Jr. could look like over the course of this game. Porter's not going to match up with that height, but his length is such a wondrous aspect of what he can do at cornerback. And across the way from him, Kalen King, Johnny Dixon, who came in last year as a South Carolina transfer, they've rotated at that spot, and they've kind of been equally shared starters. So they're going to see a lot of 3 cornerback sets. And additionally, keep an eye on safety Jair Brown. Jaquan Brisker is gone, not going to factor in anymore to this matchup, but Jair Brown has really stepped up, taking the mantle as an all Big Ten caliber safety back there and a key leader for the secondary.
Dave, it's interesting you mentioned the balance for Ohio State's offense, because I feel like all I've seen from Buckeyes fans all week is just how disappointing this run game is, being held to 2.2 yards a carry against Iowa. So I want to hear about that. But Penn State's run defense, it's had its ups and downs, but it sounds like there's some changes coming, Tyler, with Abdul Carter making his first start against Minnesota. So what can we expect to see here?
Penn State was absolutely bludgeoned out in Ann Arbor a couple weeks ago. 418 rushing yards for Michigan in that matchup. P.J. Mustipher, 2-time team captain, key defensive tackle for them, called that performance embarrassing. And you got to give them credit. They faced a Minnesota rushing attack that was going to try to assert itself, going to try to follow that blueprint that was laid out by Michigan. And instead, Mohamed Ibrahim, who's a very talented running back in this conference, managed only 102 yards. That's a season low on 30 total carries. So it was a rebound performance, a rallying performance. And a key part of that was a shuffle at linebacker. They brought in freshman Abdul Carter, who was getting a bunch of snaps, but they put him as their starting will linebacker. That led to an 8-tackle performance. He got into the backfield with half a sack, a tackle for loss. Really just an impressive freshman. He's wearing number 11. That's a big deal at Penn State. Micah Parsons was the last guy to star in that uniform at linebacker for them. And then Curtis Jacobs, as a result, goes over to the Sam linebacker position. It's a role that the former 5-star prospect filled last year. 14 tackles, that's a career high, 2 of them for a loss against Minnesota. So they ride into this matchup on a season high, but everyone around here understands that they have another test against these Buckeyes.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, as Tyler outlined, I'm very curious. Was Michigan the aberration, and then Penn State kind of found itself against Minnesota? Because Minnesota is a very good running team, and Penn State shut them down. I tend to think, maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, but we're going to find out because Penn State looked like they got some things figured out against Michigan, or excuse me, against Minnesota after that embarrassing performance against Michigan. And this Ohio State rushing offense had been good all season up until last week against Iowa, when Iowa shut them down. As Grace said, 2.2 yards per carry last week against Iowa. That does include sacks, but still, even the running backs, very putrid yards per carry. Overall, Ohio State's been good running the ball this year. They put a lot of emphasis on it. Number 21 rushing offense in the country. But Iowa was stacking the box and daring them to throw, which you wouldn't expect a team to do against C.J. Stroud, but it was working for a while. So eventually, Ohio State just went away from the running game and focused on the passing game. So this will be an interesting test. I think Ohio State's going to see a lot more of what they saw, what Penn State brought to the table against Minnesota than what Penn State brought to the table against Michigan. But Ohio State needs to be able to run the ball because they've been preaching all offseason and during the season about needing to be balanced.
All right, now if anyone wants this win on his resume, it's Sean Clifford, who's 0-3 against the Buckeyes and still trying to earn the love of his own fan base. But this Buckeyes defense, a little different than the one he's used to seeing with Jim Knowles in his first year as defensive coordinator for Ohio State. David, what does Knowles bring to the table?
He's bringing great things to the table this year for Ohio State, Grace. And, now we have to acknowledge Ohio State's played a series of terrible offenses, including last week, and teams that we thought would be good are not good. Teams that entered the season ranked that were on Ohio State's schedule, Notre Dame, Wisconsin, and some others are not ranked, are not good teams. So they've played some really bad offenses. But this defense is fast and physical. And I think really the main thing that stands out about Jim Knowles' defense is how he mixes things up. If he's going to show two high safeties before the snap, there's probably a 90% chance that's not what they're going to do. Whatever they show they're going to do pre-snap, that's not what they're going to do. And it's been a exponential improvement. They were number 59 in the country last year in total defense, and they didn't play many good offenses last year either. Number 59 in the country, and now they're the number 2 total defense in the country. But Penn State has a good offense. There's no doubt about it. I love their freshman running back. As you said, Clifford is going to be fired up for this game. He's from Ohio, his final year at Penn State. And Penn State always brings their A game against Ohio State. Always. Even though Ohio State has a 5-game winning streak, go back and look at some of those scores. They're all close. Pretty much all of them are close. One of them was a 1-point win. One was a 2-point win. So Penn State gets up for Ohio State. This is going to be a good matchup.
7-point margin of victory for Ohio State during that 5-game losing streak for the Nittany Lions. Sean Clifford has been on the field for all 5 of those losses. He was the third stringer as a freshman back in 2017 when they lost by 1 point in Columbus. And here he is. I wasn't sure if he'd make it to this 42nd career start because 3 series into last week's game, they went 3 and out. He threw a bad interception, and the boos were intensifying in Beaver Stadium with former 5-star freshman Drew Aller waiting there in the wings. Instead, Clifford goes 4 touchdown passes the rest of the way, the sharpest he's looked in any game as a passer in this matchup, and he earns Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week. So he's been a pendulum swing with Sean Clifford here in the month of October. That's kind of been the story of his career to this point, and it would mean a lot to his resume and a lot to this Penn State program if they can go for launch offensively against this Ohio State team that's going to put up points regardless of how well Penn State's defense plays. And you look at what they were able to do in the passing attack last week, a big part of that, the tight end room, Theo Johnson, Tyler Warren, both caught touchdowns. They had no touchdowns coming into the matchup against Minnesota. Brenton Strange's been impressive. But I'm going to look at the wide receivers. Can they win some one-on-one matchups downfield? Mitchell Tinsley has come in as a transfer from Western Kentucky, leads that room with 4 touchdowns. Parker Washington had a long overdue touchdown against Minnesota on a beautiful downfield grab. That was his first score of the season. I think each of those guys needs to step up, win some matchups on the perimeter. Last week was only the second time this season they've both gone over 50 yards in the same game. So the difference here in this matchup, guys, may be that Sean Clifford has the ability to turn around in that backfield and hand the ball off to 2 very talented running backs in freshman Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton. They've turned a lot of heads so far.
And what a way that would be for Clifford to go out his collegiate career, closing it with a win against his rival and ending that losing streak. All right, Dave and Tyler, thanks so much. And remember, for all your Ohio State and Penn State coverage, stay tuned to Bucknuts and Lions 24/7.